Hi guys, we're gonna talk about we're gonna do chapter 2, section 3 tonight, which is about demographic transitions, and that's gonna help you to make a little bit more sense of last night's work, which was epidemiological transitions, because it works similarly to the stages, and so last night you may have been a little bit confused with how those stages worked. And so this gives you the foundation for those stages. And I'm sorry that we did that in kind of opposite order, but the syllabus that I base my syllabus on has it working that way, and the book does it differently. So let me get this PowerPoint started. So the demographic transition, this is a model that works with 4 stages. And you notice that the epidemiological transition had 4 stages as well, but then it had that possible 5th stage that could work, based on evolution and poverty. So these stages help to explain the rising and falling of natural increase over time in a country. And historically, no stage has ever gone backwards. So they've never gone back to a previous stage. Countries only move forward. So this model shows that it's thought to have a beginning, middle, and end. So there's a process moving forward. So remember that just like last night, we're working with these abbreviations: crude birth rate, which is CBR, and crude death rate, which is CDR. So we have the crude birth rate and the crude death rate. Then we also have this abbreviation NIR, which is the natural increase rate. Okay, and we'll get into some other acronyms toward the end. We'll talk about something called zero population growth. We'll talk about that when we get to stage 4. So just hang on to that for a bit. So we'll see in different stages where we have different types of growth. So here you can see the death, sounds really creepy, the death line. The death line is the blue line. The natural increase, so the NIR, is the brown line. And then the birth line is the red line here. And you can see in each stage how that's represented by each of those lines. Okay, and this starts on page 56 of your book, and it will give you lots of details. And then we're also going to talk, hold on just a second. Oops. Okay, and then let me open my PowerPoint up. Then you'll also see the initials TFR. And the TFR is the total fertility rate. So I know that that's a lot of initials all at once in this section, but we'll get them gradually over time. And you'll see those over and over throughout the year. So don't worry if you don't get them all at once. Okay, let me go back to our show here. I know it's a great show. Okay, so in the first stage, we're going to have low growth. And this is marked by very high birth and death rates. And there is not a long-term natural increase. There are no countries right now at all that are presently in stage 1. So this is going to be where most of human history was spent. If you think, years and years ago, this was when, long before the Industrial Revolution. So this is, hundreds of years ago. So, and people do not revert, or societies do not revert. So no one has been in stage 1 for a very long time, marked by very high birth and death rates. Stage 2 is high growth. This is marked by rapidly declining death rates and very high birth rates. And because of that, because the death rates are going down and the birth rates are high, this is going to cause a high natural increase. So we're going to have a natural increase, a high natural increase in population. Europe and North America entered stage 2 as a result of the Industrial Revolution, so around approximately 1750. And in Africa, Africa, Asia, and Latin America entered stage 2 around 1950. And for these places, it was a result of the medical revolution, which was when medical technology came to the African and Asian continent, and then Latin America. So medical technology really was, I don't feel like invented is the correct word, that's the word your book uses, but medical technology began in Europe and North America, and then it diffused to developing countries, and improved medical practices eliminated many of the traditional causes of death in developing countries, and it enabled more people to experience longer, healthier lives. And so that really changed things in those places in 1950 through improved medical care. Okay, stage 3 is moderate growth. This is where birth rates are going to rapidly decline and death rates are going to continue to decline. And so the natural increase rates are going to begin to be moderate. So at this point, we have a gap between the crude birth rate and the crude death rate, and that gap is narrower in stage 3 countries than in stage 2 countries. So the population grows because the crude birth rate is still greater than the crude death rate. So we have more people being born than more people dying. And most European countries and North America transitioned into stage 3 during the first half of the 20th century. Economic changes in stage 3 societies are going to induce people to have fewer offspring. Stage 3 societies, people in stage 3 societies more often live in cities than in the countryside. They tend to work in offices, shops, or factories rather than on farms. And generally, farmers consider a large family to be an asset. And so because people in stage 3 tend to live in an urban culture, they have smaller families because of they don't have the space to accommodate larger families. And so, like we said, most countries in Europe and North America moved from stage 2 to stage 3 in the first half of the 20th century. And in other countries, for example, much of Asia and Latin America, including Chile, this took place during the second half of the 20th century. Let's see if we've got some. We don't have any maps, JK. Okay, stage 4, this is low growth. And this is marked by very low birth and death rates. So because we're going to have low birth and death rates, we don't have a long-term natural increase. We might even have a possible decrease. Countries reach stage 4 when the population gains by the crude birth rate are diminished by losses because of the crude death rate. So we actually have more people dying than people being born. And this is when we have zero population growth, or ZPG. So ZPG is when we have zero population growth. And people, or demographers, not just random people walking down the street, demographers more precisely define ZPG as the total fertility rate, and that produces no population change, as the total fertility rate that produces no population change. So that means you have either the same amount of people being born as people dying, or more people dying than people being born. So in that case, your only population change is going to come from immigration. So people coming in from other countries rather than being born. Let me see what we have to talk about that. Oh, okay, so an example of a country that is in that situation. Let me see if it shows no. Okay, an example of a country in that situation is Denmark. It's reached stage 4. And in your book, it shows population pyramids, which we'll talk about in a few days. And so if you look in your book, for example, like Denmark's population pyramid shows it is very what we call flat. And that shows that there are more people getting older and there are not very many young people. And so that indicates that they have what's called zero population growth. Okay, so there are 2 successful strategies for lowering birth rates, just in case you're interested in that. We have improving education and healthcare. This emphasizes improving local economic conditions so that increased wealth is allocated to education and health programs seeking to lower birth rates. So in countries where, and I found this really cool PowerPoint that shows how countries have lowered their birth rates, and either through laws or by propaganda and other strategies. But when you improve education, people tend to not have as many kids. It's like, oh, did they figure out how it happens? Or, a lot of times people are busy. I mean, they're busy like going to college, and so they're getting their education first and then starting their career, and so they decide to have children later, and then they don't have as many children. But when you emphasize education, when you improve education, that changes when people have kids, and that lowers birth rates. And then healthcare, of course, when people are provided adequate healthcare, they tend to not have kids as fast. And then, of course, we have contraception. That's a biggie. So we have more immediate results than the previous approach, which would be not using contraception. And this has been met with greater resistance because it goes against a lot of cultural or religious beliefs. So we have, Roman Catholics, fundamentalists, Protestants, Muslims, and Hindus who have some issues with contraception. However, this PowerPoint we're going to look at that talks about countries that have, these countries that have implemented one-child laws. Some of them have actually decided that it is more important to use contraception in order to have just one child than to follow these beliefs about, having as many kids as God might want. I don't know. I don't know if I phrased that correctly, but it's fascinating. So we'll talk more about that. Okay. So this map shows us the percent of women using some sort of family planning. So if we look at like where the United States falls, 75% and above of women are using some sort of family planning method. So we look at the United States and we look at South America, Europe, and then Russia and China. China because, they don't have the one-child law anymore, but still it's an issue. And then it gets lower and lower as we move into sub-Saharan Africa, Saudi Arabia. It's just fascinating, the places in the world where people are using different planning methods. So we'll talk more about that. Okay, so these are population pyramids, and what we see on population pyramids are the gender. So this is male, and this is female, and we see the different ages of people. So we're going to see how many males and females there are in each age bracket, and this is what's projected, is that there will be fewer young people, as people are either having fewer children or waiting until later in life to have children. But as medicine begins to improve and as healthcare improves over time, people will be living much longer. But look at this, guys. That's a little nerving, isn't it? That's kind of scary. Because women will outlive you by a lot. Okay, so we'll talk more about population pyramids. Those are fun to make. Okay, so Malthus. Thomas Malthus, who you may have learned about in World Civ. I can't remember if you learned about him in WAP. Thomas Malthus is this guy who, he's actually a bit negative. I mean, to be honest. Thomas Malthus has this concept that the population is growing faster than the increase in food supply. And a lot of geographers, and he believes that that will always be the case, that there will always be, that the population will always outgrow the food supply. So his critics, these geographers, consider his beliefs are a bit pessimistic, as you might agree. And his theory is based on the idea that the food supply is a fixed mathematical equation rather than being expanding. And geographers disagree that population increase is not a problem. So geographers say population increase is not going to be a problem, and that larger populations, in fact, stimulate economic growth, therefore the production of food. And the reality is that food production has increased over the last 50 years, and it's been faster than Malthus predicted. And his model predicted that the world population would quadruple over the course of 50 years. And even in India, where the population is huge, it hasn't outpaced food production. So what Malthus didn't realize is that, we would have so many technological advances in food production, and that we would be able to keep food production at pace with population growth. In fact, there's plenty. What's really kind of awful is that there's plenty of food in the world to feed all the people. It's just not distributed. And so, all the people that you see starving can be fed if that food were distributed adequately. So this shows us the production of, so this shows the population of India and how it's rising, but how the production of rice and wheat are rising. So you see there's plenty of wheat and rice to feed the people of India, which, when you watch shows like The Amazing Race, and then, I watched this great show last night called An Idiot Abroad. If you haven't seen it, it's great. There's some swearing, and the India one was a little disturbing because there was some yoga that showed body parts I was not comfortable with. But I think maybe we'll try and watch the China one together because it was awesome. But when you see all these people that don't have food, and then you realize there's plenty of food for everyone, it's really upsetting, actually. Okay, so let's talk about population futures. So the demographic transition model, just like the epidemiological model, has a possible stage 5, and this is decline. It's characterized by a very low CBR, crude birth rate, and an increasing crude death rate. And this would be a time when we have more elderly people than young people. And this would be a negative natural increase rate. And so over time, we're going to have few young women in childbearing years. So we're going to have a situation where there just aren't a lot of young women. And so this is going to lead to an ever falling crude birth rate. So we're just not going to have as many women who can have babies, and so less kids are being born. And several European countries already have a negative natural increase rate. Russia is the most notable. They've had a negative increase rate for 50 years. And that's what we did last night. So that's it, guys. And we're going to be working with this a lot. We're going to be making our population pyramids. It's good stuff. And I'll see you tomorrow.